Okay, I think we'll get started here. So,
Port Rowan Long Point, and he allowed me to use these. So you can just see how small that black-legged tick is. Now imagine if that's on your back or somewhere where you can't see, or if you have lots of freckles or moles or old age spots like I'm getting, you're not going to spot it. Or if your skin tone is darker than my typically pasty white. So that's one big challenge why people aren't aware of a tick. And in total, less than 50% of people with Lyme are aware of having had a tick. And then to compound that, of the ones that are aware of a tick, less than half of them get the diagnostic bullseye rash. In fact, I've seen figures as low as perhaps 9% of people with Lyme know they had a tick and had a bullseye rash, which made it a bit of a no-brainer. So this is, the real challenge. And then the other problem is the ticks don't just give you the Lyme bacteria, which is called Borrelia. They typically pass on so-called co-infections. And the most common are Babesia, which is a parasite, and Bartonella, another bacteria. And so I've got all three of these, and each one sort of presents with its own symptoms. For example, Babesia can affect your lungs and vocal cords, and you'll hear the more I speak, the raspier I'll get, and that's thanks to the Babesia parasite. And my geological interpretation of all this is perhaps the reason every Lyme patient seems to be a little bit unique in terms of the set of symptoms they present, or unique in how long it takes to recover, if at all. Perhaps it's based on the toxic load. Are you 90% Borrelia and 5 of each of the other two? Just a guess on my part. So, I said the only thing I know for sure is when it began. And I can't believe now it's been over 10 years. But in September 2013, I was just back from two trips, back-to-back trips. I was all through Southern Africa, where I know I sustained a number of bites of something. And right after getting back from that, I had to go to a wedding in Saskatchewan. There was an outdoor barbecue. I know I wandered into tall grass. And a few days after those two trips, I came down with these massive cold chills and a high fever. And I can remember clearly thinking, oh, because I contracted dengue fever from the Amazon in Brazil. And I can still remember the infectious disease doctor doing this to me. I don't get it again, because apparently dengue can go, second time around, can go hemorrhagic and be fatal. But dengue fever, it's called breakbone fever. There's no treatment for it. There's no preventative for it. You just have to suck it up, and it's about 10 days of misery, and then it's gone. But this fever lasted a couple of days and disappeared, so I totally forgot about it. And then it was about a month later that really bizarre things started to happen. So in hindsight, whatever that was I had in September was the onset of Lyme that I contracted on one of those two trips, or that was just a random secondary infection that triggered latent Lyme that I'd been carrying. I was later to find out from my Lyme expert doctor that she believed you could carry Lyme dormant for up to 10 years in your body, and a secondary infection can set it off and trigger it. So I'll never know, and it doesn't matter. It is what it is. I'll never know when exactly or where I got it. So these bizarre symptoms I mentioned, the first thing was all of a sudden, every morning when I woke up, whichever side I'd been sleeping on stayed asleep, that annoying tingling, numb sensation. You have to kind of shake it out and then move on. It became a daily thing. And then within a few days after that, I developed migratory muscle pain, where, for example, it might be my bicep would be just throbbing. And then within a few hours, the pain was in my tricep, and a few hours later, it might be in my upper back. Really, really weird. And then over the span of several weeks, I was basically having symptoms in every major body system. The big one, the most debilitating for me, was neurological. I developed peripheral neuropathy, which I have to this day. That's the pins and needles, burning, tingling sensation in your hands and your feet. Tremor, I've got quite a strong tremor. I struggle sometimes to keep my camera in focus. Loss of balance. I was walking with a cane when I was at my limiest because I needed it for, I'd lose my balance and have to do a stutter steps. The cane helped. And most embarrassingly was cognitive issues. They kindly call it brain fog, but I'll never forget, I could not count out change to buy a newspaper. And I got so frustrated. And this is where I jokingly call raging Bob. Like, I'm not that kind of guy, but I'd have these wild mood swings and I'd be raging over nothing and develop this really strong anxiety, which I have to this day for big crowds and noise. Like if I had to go through Pearson Airport during March break, I would go insane. I developed crepitus, which I still have. That's the snap, crackle, pop in your joints. I joke in my book that I thought crepitus was a good term because I felt like I was becoming decrepit. Arthritis, I've got really bad arthritis in my neck. It's very stiff and sore. The next couple are gone, thankfully. But back in the day, I had these muscle twitches. I could sit and watch, say, my forearm, and I'd see a little muscle going ding, 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 and go on for 10 or 15 seconds. And my heart would go out of rhythm, which really freaked me out. It was basically heart palpitations. And I'd get really easily winded. Just climbing a set of stairs, my legs would go to mush. And I was running hot. It was like my internal thermostat was broken and I wasn't regulating my body temperature. I developed really severe tinnitus. And unfortunately, it's at the point now where I would guess I've got 85, 90 decibel cicadas in my head 24/7. It's becoming very hard of hearing as a result of it. And then the other big debilitating thing for trying to work was that I would hit the wall every day about noon. I would just literally run out of steam, and it was all I could do to get back and home and have a nap. So really low energy. I couldn't walk more than a couple 100 meters. I was using a cane. You know, it's really, really weird. And how do you convince the medical system that these symptoms are all related and all part and parcel of one problem? And Lyme is called the great imitator because many of the symptoms that it presents are exactly the same as Parkinson's, ALS, and MS. And that's part of the reason Lyme is so hard to diagnose, because it's a process of elimination of all these other things. And just as an aside, I find it really interesting that um, here in Canada, we have the highest rate of multiple sclerosis in the world. And the sort of party line with the medical system is it's because we live so far north, we don't get enough sunshine due to our high latitude, and therefore our bodies don't build up enough vitamin D, and low vitamin D apparently is a risk factor for MS. But I would argue that there's tens of millions of Europeans living further north than we are. We forget that Europe is so far north because of the Gulf Stream making it warmer than it should be for its latitude. So, here's a geologist's medical interpretation that perhaps our high rate of MS, that excessive rate may be misdiagnosed Lyme. So here's the raging Bob dealing with the conventional medical system and why I wrote my book to get it out. So going to the doctor after that initial, everything asleep when I woke up in the morning, and he says, "Well, it's just the way you're sleeping." And at that point I was 58, and I just looked at him like, no, I've got some experience out of this. This is new. But at least then he relented, and he did make a referral to a neurologist. And the neurologist did an MRI in my brain looking for MS, and I was very relieved to say they found a brain. Um, they also did these quite painful nerve conduction tests where they give you a lifter, a shock, and then they measure how long it takes for that pain signal to travel up your muscles and your nerves. And at the end of all of that, he literally did this hand washing motion with a smirk on his face and said, "I'm sorry, you don't have a neurological disease." And yet it didn't express any curiosity or interest in explaining why I had neurological symptoms. So I managed to get myself a referral because I knew there were, I wasn't thinking Lyme initially, but uh, I knew there were some infectious disease things going around like chikungunya, mosquito-borne illness in the Caribbean. And so I was just wondering, I got myself a referral to one of the top infectious disease doctors in Canada in Toronto. And here's the quote from him: "I will evaluate Bob for everything but Lyme." So I made a hard pass on that because at that point, I probably spent $20,000 testing me for everything. And yet he refused. So then ultimately, I did get my diagnosis in the States, and I'll come to that in a minute. But when I brought that diagnosis back to my doctor, he said, of course, they found you positive. They want your business. Well, enter raging Bob. I was so pissed off at him because this is just sort of knee jerk, the American system. But this lab has no ulterior motive to find you positive or negative, no financial incentive. They're just purely a diagnostic lab. Well, so then he harumphed and said, well, where in the world could you have gotten Lyme? As if it doesn't exist in Canada. And then he seemed happier when I said, well, I do work all over the world. Uh, so then I thought I had a brainstorm. Bob, get yourself into a younger doctor. Maybe they'll be more Lyme literate, someone that's just graduated. So I managed to do that. And at that point, I was under the care of my Lyme doctor in the US. And it was costing me a lot of money. And I was hoping to get that care brought under OHIP back into Canada. And you could just see she wasn't listening to me at all. And she was totally dismissive. She just said, all I can say is if you're spending all that money in the States, buyer beware. And I looked her right in the eye and I said, if you could spend 2 minutes in this body, you wouldn't be so cavalier and dismissive. And at least she had the courtesy to blush. So then my daughter Candace said, well, Dad, you would have been better off going to a vet. We inoculate our dogs. There's a vaccine for Lyme. So, you're fighting misdiagnosis, misunderstanding, and mistreatment when you're least able to do so because you're scared. There's something going on. You can't control your anxiety and your raging mood, and you're wondering what's going on. You're being dismissed by the doctors. Now, I must say this was 10 years ago, and I think things have gotten better, but still, you have to be your own medical advocate and don't take no for an answer. Now, here's the photo I want to refer to. I just think these great horned owlets are just the cutest Muppet babies. This was over in London, Ontario, a few years ago. So I was lucky because that fall, that first Christmas with whatever was going on, I had a friend over for a visit, and I was catching her up on what was going on, and I could see she'd stopped listening and wanted to interrupt me. And it turns out she has a friend who has Lyme and diagnosed Lyme. And she was recognizing everything I'd gone through and the symptoms. So she was the first to plant the word Lyme in my brain. Because, at that point, before I'd seen her, I hadn't even considered it. And almost simultaneously, another friend told me about a problem that she'd had with a really long-term medical problem that the conventional system couldn't diagnose. And she went to this alternative doctor, an alt doctor who conducts this bizarre galvanic skin testing, electrodermal testing. As a scientist, I found it very bizarre. And she says, you're going to find him out there and weird. But she says, he told me what he thought it was. I took that back, and lo and behold, it was confirmed by the conventional system. So I went and saw this guy with great skepticism. And essentially, he pulsates all these different frequencies, electromagnetic frequencies through your body. And each frequency is or each life form is supposed to resonate at a certain harmonic frequency. And he pulsated through me 240 frequencies for, different bacteria, parasites, and viruses. And of the 240, I lit up on 6. And every one of them was either a strain of Lyme, there's about 300 strains of the Lyme bacteria, and the co-infections like Babesia, for example. So that was pretty interesting. Now, the Lyme bacteria is a spirochete, meaning that it's actually corkscrew shaped, and this may or not be why I had the migratory muscle pain, because the bacteria is not just in your bloodstream. It's actually in the muscles and screwing its way through your muscles. That may cause the moving pain. But spirochete. This guy was Australian. It was really funny. He shouts at me, "It's a spear rocket, Mike." So there's my diagnosis. And then, the real diagnosis was this lab I talked about. It's called IGeneX. If anybody ever needs the blood work, it's in Palo Alto, California, which is Silicon Valley. It was a guy that made, $1 bazillion, I believe, in the in the dot-com era and had gone through the exact same experience as me. Bizarre symptoms, couldn't get a diagnosis, couldn't get respect, couldn't get a treatment. And he devoted his money to setting up better diagnostic methods for detecting Lyme. So this is why when my doctor said he wants your business, it made me so angry, because this lab is just a diagnostic lab. And they don't directly detect the Lyme, they detect antibodies. And I came back with a very, very high reading of Lyme antibodies. So I got myself in as a patient with Maureen McShane. She's retired now. She's actually lives in Montreal, but she's set up in Plattsburgh, New York, about an hour south, because Canadian doctors have lost their licenses for prescribing massive doses of antibiotics. And so when I was seeing her, she was like the rock star for Canadian Lyme patients. She had about 1,500 patients at the time, and between 90 and 95% of them were Canadian. So she put me on a really strict diet, no sugar, no starch, no yeast, essentially a paleo diet. And that was to prevent any nasty side effects of the antibiotics I was on. I was taking up to 18 antibiotic pills a day. And she cycled me on and off different antibiotics again over 2.5 years. And after that, she said, Bob, I think I've done all I can do for you. Where do you think you're at? And I said, I'm probably about 60% better. The cane was in the closet and I could count change out, but I couldn't work and continue to function in the role I was being paid for. So I had to retire, which was the fall of 2015. And I moved to Ancaster in December of 2015. Turns out I got lucky and found a home that has an incredibly birdie backyard. And I put bird feeders up immediately when I first moved in. Before I get into that, I just want to say I do still have what's called, or I call, chronic Lyme. The official term is post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome. And apparently about 10 to 20% of us develop this chronic Lyme. And what's really interesting now is that there's been a lot of comparison between what I have and long COVID, even though one's a bacteria and COVID is a virus. It's very gratifying for me that the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta last fall, just recently, they've added Lyme finally as an infection that they consider capable of causing chronic symptoms. And I don't think they would have done that without long COVID. And in both cases, the $64,000 question is, what's causing the chronic? Does it mean I've got persistent bacterial infection? Or did the treatment kill off the bacteria, but the Lyme put me into an autoimmune situation and overamped my immune system? So what I'm really experiencing is an autoimmune inflammation causing my aches and pains. And clearly that's a big question to sort out, because you don't want to keep trying to kill something that's not there. You want to treat the inflammation. I took this picture out of my home office window in my backyard 3 or 4 days ago. Some days that's what I feel like. So, back to being retired in the end of 2015, I put up my bird feeders. And, Carolina Wren came to the feeders. And, being from up your way, I do believe you guys are getting the odd one now. It was certainly new to me. And so, being a science guy, I started reading up on the birds of the area and researching. And I even took a course online from Cornell, trying to fill my retirement days. And all of a sudden it dawned on me one day while I was sitting reading about birds and watching the feeders that I'd been sitting there for like 3 hours and not doing my usual twitching and shuffling around in pain. And, my mind was off my body. And part of that research, I discovered that there was this fabulous Hamilton Naturalist Club with all kinds of expertise. And I signed up for a little field trip, just a half-day thing, and I made some new friends that have become mentors ever since. I got tips on cameras and binoculars. And so, a lot of people talk about what's your spark bird that hooked you on birding. To me, it wasn't really that Carolina Wren so much. It was that field trip that really hooked me. And, all of a sudden I took up birding, and I was walking with my cane at that point. but I bought a Fitbit, and all of a sudden I could walk a kilometer and then 2 kilometers. Now, clearly I wasn't better, but my mind was off my pain. When I look back and compare my 35 years in mineral exploration, there's a lot of similarity between birding and exploration. I mean, they're both a treasure hunt, and you're searching for hidden gems. And, every now and then you do find gold like this. Here's the golden crown kinglet looking for insects in goldenrod. And of course, in like any specialty, you have to learn the lingo. So for a geologist, a BIF stands for a banded iron formation. And here's a beautiful sample from my rock and mineral collection from Temagami of a BIF. But one day I was out birding and a flock of tundra swans went over, and I heard some folks close to me saying, "Oh, I'm really lousy at taking photos of BIFs." And I swiveled around, looked at them, and I thought, what the heck are they talking about? So I quickly learned that BIF no longer stood for banded iron formation. It's birds in flight. And then of course I had to learn the terms like lifer and dipped on it and nice capture. And the most annoying one of all, you should have been here 10 minutes ago, or it was just here. Birds do have wings, and it's why I don't really do a lot of twitching, but I will come to that. So, I'd like to sit back and think, how do you define birding? Those of you in the audience that are birders, that it's highly addictive. It can be a compulsion or an obsession. It certainly is with me. But what I really like about birding is different people, different birders take different things out of it and have different drivers and what brings them to it. For some, it's a science. For some, it's like an art, a recreation, or hobby. Some, it's a very competitive game or sport, having the biggest list or eBird list or whatever. And for some, it's just like almost a spiritual experience. But I think at a really high level, there's two main drivers for birding. One is appreciative motivation, and one is achievement. Now, the appreciative side is the well-based motivations, and these are the ones that really drive me the most. Being in the great outdoors and fresh air and enjoying nature and getting exercise, sharing experience with friends, though I'll come to the fact that with my anxiety, I prefer to be in very, very small crowds or alone, and getting your mind off your body or mental calming. So, I gave myself ticks for all four of these. I probably shouldn't say tick. I gave myself checks for all four of these. So the other half is the achievement motivation. And this is more of the goal setting, more of the competitive side. Like this is the listing, keeping a backyard list, a winter list, a county list, district list, province list, life list, photography, building your skills, contributing through backyard bird counts or atlasing, maintaining social media or a blog. And some of these I've gotten into as well, but more so the well-being side for me. And I know it's a corny dad joke, but for me, BIRDS is an acronym for birding inevitably reduces disease symptoms. I mean, look at this tufted titmouse. How can you not feel happy and smile and relaxed when you look at that? And by the way, they do live all around me, and I've only ever had one come to my feet or once, and I was so gobsmacked, it was there and gone. I didn't even reach for my camera. So, why am I passionate? That my main health benefit is that it's a form of mindfulness and mental calming. It gets my mind off my body and helps me cope with my limitations. It challenges my sense of observation. It slows me down and makes me more patient than I normally am, waiting for that perfect look or photo. And taking pride in learning to identify species by sight and less and less by song because of my hearing. And I certainly didn't set out to be a bird photographer. Initially, there was no Merlin app, and I didn't know what I was looking at. So I would take pictures and bring them home and look them up to see, research them to figure out what I was seeing and learn that way. But then over time, I started taking pride in getting better and better shots. So it's a side of it I actually enjoy. Um, Another big one is friends. I never dreamt I could make so many new friends at my age, and throughout my life, and I'm going to call that BB and not for Bob Bell, but for before birding, my friends, I bet this applies to most of you. Our lifetime friends are ones, they were neighborhood kids, classmates, and then once we were working, work colleagues. But once you become a birder and become part of this community, you get bonded with this mutual shared intense passion from people of all walks of life. And I've really enjoyed that. It's gotten me out of my bubble of nothing but lawyers and geoscientists. I, and here's a shot I like to refer to because I watched this little female hummingbird fly in and lay down on this leaf and put her head down. And I thought she was sleeping. And I sent the photo to Cornell and they came back and told me she was sunbathing. But it just shows you how light they are that she could lay down on a leaf. I love getting the exercise, soaking up nature. What I really love is watching birds go about their busy lives. They're so industrious. And I love the fact that the cyclicity of birds, the season, the migration, and even after fall migration, we have owl season and duck season, and then back into wading birds and migration. I like the way they demark the seasons and passage of time, that no matter how bad stuff is going on in the world, the birds are very consistent. And this is a very busy chart, don't worry, but just showing frequency of some warblers as they pass through in the spring. Just a bit of a joke that, here you are in early June and the fun is over. And, for me, every morning during spring migration, you feel like a kid that's waited for Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and the Tooth Fairy all coming overnight because you never know what came in. So, it used to be called bird watching, but now everybody calls it birding. And I like that. It's a much more serious term. It's more active and less passive. But more important to me is it's more inclusive. For example, there are blind birders. So they're not bird watching, but they're certainly birding. And it no longer is the stereotypical hobby of old men in tilly hats. And I love when I go out now, I see so many young people having taken it up. And I personally think a lot of it has to do with the appeal of technology, all the apps and being able to e-bird on your phone in real time and digital cameras and all the Discord hotlines. And I just think it's made it a lot more fun. It's almost like a real life video game for younger people. Now, even people that say they're not interested in birds, I guarantee you they use a bunch of expressions. And I'm not going to sit and read these. I devoted a whole appendix in my book. I just tried to think of every expression I could. And we use a lot of bird expressions. Probably the best thing that came out of the pandemic was that birding became the fastest growing hobby in the entire world. There were articles from newspapers in India and London and New York Times, an explosion of interest. Because it didn't matter what your pastime was, even if it was just being a couch potato watching drag racing or football on TV, it wasn't happening. So people would go for a walk around their neighborhood or sit out in their yard if they had a backyard, and all of a sudden we're more aware of the birds, and I suspect the birds were louder sounding because there was less traffic and less industrial noise. So it was really, I think birds really helped people get through the pandemic. And there already are lots of scientific papers and books about birds and just nature in general as being very good as calming for our mental health. But I think mine is actually the first one that takes it a step further into physical health as well. So I'm really a big believer in just enjoying the birding the way you want to. It is not a contest. Um, it's not a skill building contest. You bird your birdability. You take out of it what you want. Not every type of birding requires a long, strenuous hike or expensive gear or lots of knowledge. If you're sitting watching bird feeders or sitting on a park bench listening to birds, as far as I'm concerned, you're birding. And if you do have some health issue that you unfortunately can't leave home, you can sit and watch nest cams or feeder cams literally 24/7 from around the world. And I tried to put a lot of these resources in my book to get people hooked. Now, my birdability with my line, as I mentioned this already, is that yes, I love my birding friends, and it's fantastic to share the experience of getting a lifer with a friend. But I really prefer to bird alone because I always have this anxiety that I don't want to be the one to run out of steam and ruin it for everybody else if we're carpooling and I do hit the wall and just have to call it a day. I don't want to be the one that ruins it. And I really can't stand, like I talked about Pearson Airport, I can't stand birding in hot spots. Last year I went to Point Pewley, and there was like 200 people on a prothonotary warbler, and all you could hear was click, 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 click. And it was like paparazzi on a red carpet. And if I can't see the bird or I can't get in focus, you just the anxiety goes off. As Carter knows, I'm embarrassed to say I don't eBird. I use eBird to know what's where, but I don't contribute to it because if I had to count birds and keep all those records, it would ruin it for me. It would just stress me with my Lyme anxiety. So that's just the way I am. Now I mentioned twitching. That's the British term for chasing rare birds, which goes back to the 50s. Apparently, there was a couple of young guys that were chasing birds on a motorcycle, and the passenger in the back was always twitching in the cold. So that's where the term started. But the one time I did do a twitch that I want to talk about was a year ago when this Lewis's woodpecker showed up on Manitoulin Island. I've shown its range map there. So, I've got a brother who lives in Gore Bay and an aunt there. So I thought I'm going to go up and see this one and do a family visit. And lovely, some of you may have gone over to see it. Lovely, lovely couple, Phyllis and Bob, that opened up their yard. They had, I think, a grand total of 299 birders came to see this Lewis's woodpecker. And there's no sexual dimorphism in Lewis's. The males and females look the same. You can't tell them apart. But Phyllis was so funny. She said, well, Bob, he's obviously male. I said, well, why, Phyllis? She said, well, first off, he's lost. And then she waited a second and she says, and furthermore, he didn't stop and ask for directions. So there is a type of friends. Now, Phyllis and Bob have become friends because of it. So it just shows the power of how birds connect us. But the type of birding that I've really taken up, and all the kudos go to Carter, is this 5MR. And spanning for 5 mile radius. It's a personal challenge to find as many species as you can within a 5 mile radius of your home. Kind of two objectives. One is it lowers our carbon footprint, so we're not driving all over the place. And you may fill in, if I was eBirding, you might help fill in the databases for areas that might be historically underbirded. But Carter put out the Ontario-wide challenge in late 2019 for 2020. Well, he must have had a crystal ball. He couldn't have picked a better year to challenge people to bird at home because Algonquin Park was closed, Point Pewley was closed. It didn't matter where you wanted to go; they were closed, and you were supposed to stay home. Well, I took it up wholeheartedly, and it gave me great comfort because I discovered, for example, a storm drainage pond that's tucked away. I didn't know it was there. A farmer's pond I didn't know was there. And so I started getting shorebirds, wading birds, ducks, and waterfowl that I never dreamt I would get within 5 miles of home. So it gave me great comfort to realize that as I get older, if and when my health deteriorates further, I don't need to travel to bird to get my fix. I can get a great fix right around home. And I'm pretty pleased. I'm up, since the start, cumulatively, I'm up to 206 species. And I'm aware of at least 20 that I dipped on where I was probably up in Algoma when friends, got something like, for example, a yellow-breasted chat right here in my 5MR. So, here's some of my highlights. Last year we had this little blue heron. It's I didn't mature. It's not blue yet. I've had a cattle egret, a magpie, black vulture, Nelson's and Harris's sparrows, whippoorwill. Never dreamt I'd see these within 5 miles of my house. So, you get out there, you never know what you're going to see. It's essentially free therapy and lots of fun. You wouldn't believe how many hours I sat at my desk looking out the window, waiting to get a picture of a chickadee landing on my chickadee ornament. But I must admit, I do have an ulterior motive to try to convince people to take up birding. The more people that are into birding, there's more people interested in conservation, protecting birds and their habitats, doing exactly what Kensington Conservancy is doing, preserving and enlarging green spaces, and concerned about climate change. And climate change is a great segue back to Lyme and ticks because it's climate change which is allowing this drastic expansion. Now, these are Public Health Ontario maps, 2016 on the left, 2022 on the right. You can see there has been an expansion. I dare say that both maps vastly underestimate the range, particularly the 2016 one when they really didn't care as much. They're taking it more seriously now. But still, up at our camp right about here last year near Thessalon, I picked up 4 black-legged ticks in one trail. And Thessalon's not showing there, sadly. And sadly, it's our beloved birds are the vector that are transporting the ticks north. And so here's a veery and a warbler, and just covered in ticks. The ticks fall off. It's warmer. They survive. But please, I'm really concerned. I don't mean to fear monger. The last thing I want you to do is let fear of Lyme ruin your love of nature and the outdoors. Just remember that not every bug bite is a tick bite. And I put bug in quotes because ticks aren't insects, they're arthropods. And not every tick is the deer tick or black-legged tick, and not every deer tick is carrying Lyme. So some sensible precautions: stay on the trails, avoid tall grass, don't be sitting on the ground, tuck your pants into your socks. I like wearing tall rubber boots. Throw your clothes into the dryer when you get home. 10 minutes on high heat will kill them. And nothing else be like this romantic couple. We get back to the cabin, I'll open the champagne, build a nice fire, and we can examine each other for ticks. And not a bad pun, but Lyme is curable and treated immediately, so you want to act quickly. The clock is ticking. But I'm really, really thrilled to know now that pharmacists have been given the right to prescribe antibiotics for Lyme. You don't have to go through what I did. I was 13 months in that whole process of eliminating everything else, and then finally getting my diagnosis. And by then it was too late. I'm living with chronic Lyme. But it's not all doom and gloom. Supposedly the ticks need over 24 hours to pass on the bacteria. I know there's a bit of controversy over that, but that has been encouraging. And there is a new vaccine in development. There actually was a Lyme vaccine called Limerix. It was discontinued in 2002 thanks to the anti-vaxxers of the day. And quite frankly, there probably wasn't a big enough market for it. And sadly, there is now. In my understanding, there's more definitive blood tests coming as well. Because right now, the blood tests at the Ontario government, at least when I was there, they're really bad. They have over 50% false negatives. So that's a real snapshot of my book. Obviously, a lot more details in there. If you're already a birder and trying to convince somebody else, I think giving them a copy of my book might tip them over the edge, because I do give a lot of resources. Where to buy? You can buy it online directly from the publisher, Hancock House, or based in Vancouver, or Amazon or Indigo. Up in your area, Marnie Stone, who owns the Artesian on Queen Street in the Sioux, has it. Stephanie Mitchell has it at SMS Creations and Bruce Mines. Science North and Backyard Birder have it in Sudbury, and of course it's all down here in the GTA. And I'm quite proud to say that it's in the Visitor Center at Algonquin, Point Pelee, and Birds Canada headquarters at Long Point. And I must say, imposter syndrome is running really high, because it's just so humbling and surreal to see my book on the same shelves as Roger Tory Peterson, and here's David Sibley. So any questions, or feel free to reach out to me. My email is robertcbell5@gmail. I'm very active on social media, on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram. My handle's all the same, the Birder Bob. So feel free to follow me. Just one last word. I love this shot I got of this he or she saw-whet owl looking very, very proud of itself, holding a vole here. Birding is such a great hobby, because you're dwelling on the joy of being in the moment and sharing the planet with these beautiful creatures. And it just takes you out of your body and gets your mind off your worries. It teaches you to value birds. Birding really is the gateway to environmental awareness. So like I've already said, if you care about birds, you care about their habitats, the environment, and climate change. And it is great therapy, and free, unless the birds start to charge us. So, for me, birding sort of brings serenity, which helps me cope with my chronic pain. And the last couple of sentences I wrote in my book are, Life is a journey, and it's incumbent on us to make the best of it. I hope my journey might inspire some folks suffering with a chronic illness to get out of the limelight and into the sunlight, where the singing birds will warm your heart and lift your spirits. So I wish you all good birding and good health, and thank you for attending. I'll stop screen sharing.
Thank you so much, Bob. That was a fantastic presentation. I know I've seen you over the last few years, all your links to all your presentations that you've done for other organizations, and I've never had the chance to tune in. So I missed out on a lot of good presentations, but happy that I got to see it now. That was fantastic.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, no problem. So if there's any questions, I encourage you to either turn your screen on, unmute yourself and ask away, or put your questions into the chat. Well,
I'm getting off light.
oh, a couple of thank yous in the chat.
Hi, Darlene. We must meet.
um, Yeah, so and as promised, everyone who signed up this evening is going to get entered in a draw to win a copy of Bob's book. He had generously offered to mail the winner a copy of it. So I'll do that draw tomorrow and send around the results to everybody when we send around the recording of this webinar. So yeah, if there's anything that you want to review again from this evening, the webinar has been recorded. It'll be up on our YouTube channel. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to it tomorrow, so might have to wait till after Easter, but I'll send around an email with the link once it's ready. So yeah, not seeing any questions. Thanks again, Bob. This is great and really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and thanks, Carter. That was fun. Nice to talk to my home crowd.
All right, have a good evening, everyone.
Okay, take care.